Hi, and welcome to the THC Show with Neil. THC is for Truth, Hope, and Change, and on this show we like to expose some of the not-so-nice truths of our society and our governments and all of that. But at the same time, we look for ways that we can be hopeful and provide some mechanisms for people to change some things. Today on the show, we'll have Glen Wells, as always, helping us out with the 420 session. And Jerry Martin's coming in for the Martin Medical Moment. And very happy to have Dr. MJ Milloy on the program today as my main guest. He's the cannabis professor at UBC that is looking into the harm reduction potentials of cannabis and other things like that. So I'm very happy to have him on the show. For my rant today, I want to continue on with the theme that we've been on for a while, and that's just how corrupt our government is and this situation is, especially with respect to the cannabis file. But cannabis and its attempt to be prohibited and overregulated is just one example, and probably the best example, but it's just an example of just how corrupt things are and how deep it goes. Lies, lies, and more lies is what we're being told all the time. You certainly cannot trust your government. The price of cannabis, as we've mentioned before, is just outrageous. It's just a plant. It grows like most other plants. There's no other crop out there that farmers or horticulturalists are getting any more than $10 a pound for. And the fact that cannabis is at $12 a gram is worth $5,000 a pound. And that's being propped up by this artificial inflation that's happening due to the lies that are being told by our governments. You know, in war, the first casualty is always the truth. And I'm going to tell you, this is definitely a war. We didn't declare war on anybody as a culture of people using cannabis in our lives. The war has been declared on us. They say it's over now, that we have legalization, but it is not over, and this is not legalization. This war has been going on for a very long time. It's a war that is specifically targeted this culture of people that refuse to obey and use the government supplied and sponsored drugs and other things that cannabis is good for, fuel and textiles and industrial uses as well as that. But this is not really a war on drugs that they declared, as it states, although it could certainly be classified as a war on drugs that they can't patent and control. But really, this is a war against people. It's a war against people that refuse to obey and just not use these drugs that they can't patent and control. And they're brutal in their tactics, and it's really sophisticated, and they know what they're doing. They've got such amazing techniques that they're using. You know, war is fought on many levels, and certainly this is a violent war that's going on with people being put into cages and having their lives ruined and being fined large sums and having their reputations ruined because of the stigmatization and the criminalization of cannabis around the world. The globally enforced prohibition centered from the DEA in Washington, but really just on behalf of the corporate entities that really pull the strings. There's places around the world, there's a half a dozen countries where they'll execute you for having just over an ounce of cannabis, and major penalties. There's 250,000 people that are in jail in the United States for non-violent crimes to do with cannabis, and many of them serving long-term sentences, having no victims and having harmed no one. So it's very brutal on that side of it. It is a violent war, and they're using guns and people with guns and cages and confining people and like I said, also ruining their lives. But they're fighting this war on many other fronts as well. It's an information war, for example. The lies that are being told and the mainstream media that prints these lies and helps propagate and prop up this this horrible and unjustified expenditure of our tax dollars to prevent people from accessing and using cannabis especially, but the other plant medicines as well. It's an outrage. There's just a few words that I can use to describe it that aren't foul, because it really is a war and it's a horrible thing. They're fighting it financially, of course. The banks won't give loans to people that want to be involved in the cannabis trade, and you can't get insurance for things. And all of these groups are connected to that evil empire and that evil small group of people that really do control things around here. And I can't emphasize enough just how horrible this war is, how it affects families and individuals. And you may be able to use weed or not get caught up in it, and it might not touch you personally, but it touches all of us in the amount of money that they're wasting on our behalf to try to protect this racket that they've got going. And it does hurt most of us in our families, as we know people that have been harmed by these prohibitions. We all live in fear of the police that we should really not have to live in fear of, because we might have cannabis or something like that, or some other way that we're breaking the law with non-victim or victimless consensual crimes that our government has instituted here in finding ways to penalize us and fine us, and to continue to prop up this evil empire of corporate greedy bastards that have been at this for a very long time. And so now they've decided that they can't win the war by just lying outright about cannabis and prohibiting it, and that they were losing that part of it, much like with alcohol prohibition, which is all about protecting the Rockefellers' fuel interests. When people started having illegal stills all over the place and the government was losing control, they then decided to legalize alcohol. And you look back on how they did that. They brought it under the auspices of government, and they control it very carefully. And yes, you can brew some of your own, and many people do, but the alcohol distribution is handled by the government, who then just became the gangsters and the Al Capones, and the corruption runs deep because on that file as well. And now they're trying to do the same thing with cannabis. They're declaring that the legalizers have won, and now we've got legalization. But oh, by the way, we're going to increase the amount of money for enforcement. We're going to increase the penalties that we can charge you with and the number of crimes involved. And yes, you can have cannabis as long as you can buy cannabis as long as you buy it off of Trudeau's dealers. But if you try to be other than a Trudeau dealer, then you don't get to sell cannabis, and they're going to come down hard. And we've got this deplorable unit, the so misnamed community safety unit, is running around blocking access, robbing dispensaries, and trying to keep people from being able to access cannabis for reasonable prices compared to the government stores, but mostly for purposes other than what the government stores are able to supply. And that is for medical needs and for people that don't have enough money to afford the government increase from prohibition prices that they've got going on, which is another horrible side of this, is that they not only are allowing you to buy cannabis legally, but the prices that they're charging just have the fine built right into it. So rather than go to your dealer and pay $8 or $10 a gram for cannabis, and then have the police stop you and take your cannabis away, and then you end up getting fined for having it. Well, all of those added on costs are just put right into the legal cannabis that they're distributing to people. You can buy $15 and $20 grams that obviously just have all of those different losses that could happen in the black market built into this legal system, and therefore they think that they can charge these exorbitant prices for what is nothing more than a plant like any other plant, although better than most. But when it comes to actually producing it and growing it, it's not much more difficult than any of the other plants that you can grow out there. Heirloom tomatoes, orchids, and other things that take a great deal of care are not fetching any more than about $20 a pound for those things as well. And here we are with cannabis, and it's in the thousands of dollars per pound, not because it costs more to grow, but only because you're going to be a criminal if you get caught growing it outside of the system, and you can have your properties seized and your money seized. Or if you grow within the system, you've got to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a license to the federal government, go through all the different hoops with the other levels of government. You have to put up level 5 security, which is about $1 million off the hop to have a secure location to grow, and then grow with all the restrictions that are placed on it, so that you're going to make a lot of money because not other crops grow for that much, but they're reducing the amount of money you make because of all the fines and the fees and the costs that the government is imposing that are all artificial, unnecessary, completely unjustified. But that's the world that we live in. So they say that we won and we didn't, and this war is still going on, and it's highly targeted at the people that are the most vulnerable. They don't want people knowing that you can use cannabis for medicine, because then they're going to have to supply it to people like they supply other medicines, although taxpayers would pay for that. but still it interferes with their pharmaceutical profits. 3,000% markup on things, and then forced to use it because you can't use herbal alternatives because they're just not available, and the government's blocking these stores and it's blocking the information. And the government is not the enemy. The government's just a tool of the enemy. They should be a tool of ours, but the enemy is the corporate elite and the people that want to really enslave us and exploit us for everything they can get out of us. And they've been doing it for millennia and generations here, and they're still doing it today. And the most glaring example of that is the attempt to prohibit cannabis and from people from accessing cannabis and being forced to use these other drugs and other things that have nasty side effects but make them a whole lot of money. So that's kind of my rant. I'm very upset about these things. It's why I do what I do. I think everybody should be really upset about these things. The world that we're living in is upside down. It's backwards. It's inside out. And a lot of people are being harmed. It has lots of opportunities to disappear and hide and to not do anything and to just be overwhelmed and discouraged and sit in your living room and be entertained and distracted. There's all of these different things that are there so that people don't get upset about what's really going on, and they don't get upset about how much of their money they're having to spend and give to a government that's using it to hurt people and support greedy corporate bastards. And so we really need to wake up about these things and do our part. Everybody's a crew on this planet. You're brought here to do something, to make your mark and to try to make the world a little bit of a better place. And we all have different ideas and different personalities on how we can do that. And I would really encourage you to find the ways to do that, because life is not all pretty and nice like they would like us to believe it is. It's really underneath all of that. It's very corrupt. The corruption runs deep, and it's costing us all dearly, and it's hurting us all in large ways. And we can't trust our police, and we can't trust anybody in government, and all those things are so very wrong. We really should have a government of public servants that recognize that every individual that they're charged with overseeing is respected as a sovereign being, and that we're free, and that we're free to do as we choose and don't do as we choose not to do unless we're hurting somebody else. And that's the freedom that was fought for by those people that have gone before us, those giants that were willing to take bullets to try to defeat those tyrants and those kings and those people that are enslaving us and forcing us to work and produce for them. And so that we now, crawling on the shoulders of those giants, really need to take that seriously and recognize how all they've done is shifted the way that they're at war with us. And they've shifted the way that they do that. And they're sneaky and they're clever and they're liars. And you can't trust what's going on. So watch out for what the mainstream media tells you in most cases. Learn how to read between those lines and see what the hidden agenda is behind all of those stories. And be an active citizen and play your part, because we all have a part to play. And if we all played our part, then they wouldn't have a chance. But because they've managed to get a lot of us to not take part and not be involved in trying to fight against the tyranny that's still here today, even in the so-called free society, they're winning that side of it. And we need more people on the other side of it so we can win and take back those rights that we deserve, that we naturally have to be free. And we'll live much better, happier lives of abundance when we have that kind of freedom and aren't under the thumbs and being exploited by these corporate financially elite people who don't care anything about you or me or our families, but care only about how much money they can make and how much they can feel like they're in control of people. So that's what I have to say about all of that. We have some news items, as always. And the news kind of goes along with what I'm saying in many ways. We have the top U.S. doctor, Jerome Adams. There's a name that'll go down in infamy, along with so many others like Harry Anslinger. They've managed to pay him enough money that he'll give up his moral fiber and get up and say that weed is dangerous and we shouldn't be legalizing it. And it's absolute garbage. And if you actually listen to what he had to say, you'll see that it's all just weasel words, and he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. And he's really got no standing at all on that. In a world where we have commercial tobacco killing millions of human beings every 12 months around the globe. We've got alcohol that causes so much harm. We've got so many other things that are dangerous. And if he's got any intelligence and any ability to look into things, he would see that the LD50 rating, that rating that they give all of the things that could possibly be ingested to see where their lethal dose level is. And the LD50 rating is the lethal dose that 50% of average humans that would ingest that particular dose would die. And the LD50 rating on cannabis says that it's way less dangerous than tomatoes and just about anything you can get in the produce department or the grocery store itself or the drugstore or the plants in your house and living room and yard. Cannabis is one of the least dangerous. It's one of the safest therapeutically active compounds known to man. That's a quote from a judge in the United States back in the 80s. And it's the truth, and it's been demonstrated repeatedly. Yet here we have the top doctor in the States coming out and saying that weed is dangerous. And we have McMaster's University coming out and saying that cannabis is not helpful at all with people that are trying to go through withdrawal from opioids. And there again, they're just completely full of shit. They're getting their information by doing a meta-study on other studies that didn't do the proper studies, because if they really wanted to study anything, they could come down over the last 2 years and 9 months to what we're doing at Van Do, where we're giving out high-dose edibles and cannabis to people to help them get off of opioids, or they would experience what I've experienced in my career of being close to the beat of the people and close to on the streets to where the people actually live and where things are actually going on, where I know hundreds, literally hundreds of people that have used cannabis successfully to go through the detox from hard drugs and opioids, and they'll tell you that cannabis has saved their lives. So these people are once again just shills for an evil empire that are doing their very best to lie to you, because that's the way they think they can win this war, and it's one of the weapons that they have. But don't be fooled by it. Think for yourself, look into it yourself, and you'll find out that cannabis is extremely beneficial in offsetting the use of opioids. It's extremely beneficial for going through withdrawal and for just overall wellness and health. And in so many other situations where people have issues, it's because of our endocannabinoid system. If you're going to research this at all, look up that one, Google endocannabinoid system. We have a system inside of our bodies that reproduces the same cannabinoids that are found on the cannabis plant, and that's why it helps with so many things. So these people are complete liars, and they're just front men for an evil empire of people that want to continue to have cannabis prohibition and to profit off of that and to keep people from accessing what should be extremely cheap, really good, valuable medicine and other industrial things for us to be using. There is some hope and some good news. I'll say that Neil Franklin of LEAP is involved with what's called MORE, the Marijuana Opportunity and Reinvestment and Expungement Act, and that's being put before the House Judiciary Committee today. And is it tomorrow? It's today and tomorrow, actually. It's being put forward today for amendments, and then it'll go forward tomorrow, I believe. And I could be wrong, as usual. I could be wrong, but we have 419, so get ready for that.
Full text for the bill is in the show notes, so you can let people know.
There you go. Yeah, you can see it there. We try to provide that information, and I guess I'll leave that one for later. We're going to talk a little bit about what the LPs are doing to try to protect their interests in this war against cannabis. And I'll say that it's not just about money. They really don't like disobedient people. And this is a war against the cannabis culture. And I don't mean cannabis culture, the organization and empire that I'm able to broadcast from here, but I mean all of the people that use cannabis in their lives. That it's a real war against those people. And it's a real shame that it's going on, and we need to do something about that. So there we go. Now, as always, at this time, it's coming right up to 4:20. Almost always, I have 8 out of 10 Glen from CannaMatch.ca, who's going to come and help us share a little bit of cannabis, as is the thing to do for this culture of people, that at 4:20, which it is now, we like to light up and share cannabis and share thoughts and share love, because that's what cannabis does for us. So without any further ado, hey Glen.
Hey Neil, how you doing?
Welcome back from the cup.
Thank you very much. It's been a couple of weeks. A nice drive in the snow.
Yeah, I was going to ask how the traveling was.
It was not too bad, actually.
You made it.
We did it pretty good, yeah.
Well, that's good.
No extra hours.
Because last year, didn't make it past Banff for a lot of people.
Yeah, this time I went Jasper. Come down
I did the same thing last year, and then that's what helped me too. I got past all of that. We got a clip from the cup. You're wearing your medal there.
Yeah, I won the best eye for the Great Canadian Way.
The Great Way In.
The Way In, yes.
Or Way Out.
Lord takes first, Cindy takes silver, and Glen takes bronze. Lord takes gold, Cindy silver, Glen
You
bronze.
cut this short, did you?
So
I thought we had a couple minutes there. It went on longer than that.
what it is basically they put a pile of weed in front of you and they tell you to eye out an amount. So on the first round it was to weigh out a quarter or eye out a quarter, and my first weight was 7.01.
Wow.
Which was right on.
Right, all right. I can't get closer than that.
Yeah. And then the second round I got beat out by the other two, Gord and Cindy.
I see.
But I still got bronze.
Yeah, you got a medal around your neck. That's
I've
something.
never won a medal on a cup.
I got one of those at home.
You got one of those?
Yeah, I got one of
What'd you
those.
win yours for? Can you remember?
Oh, man.
Was it the rolling? Fastest roller? Fattest
It
joint?
was for joint rolling, and at that time, Craig from Expert Joints was the main judge on that. And it wasn't just about how fast you rolled it; it was also about the technique involved and all of that.
Yes.
And I did win a medal for that.
Yeah, you had to be able to smoke the joint that you rolled.
You had to be able to smoke it.
That was one of the rules. Yeah. You can roll, but you got to be able to smoke it too.
Well, and Craig, he's definitely an expert on such things, and he has a pretty critical eye for things.
Yes.
And I was pretty happy to win that. I'm not sure I could have won it in years after that.
Yeah, it's not that you're going up against him. You want to that guy rolls.
Heck, he can roll blindfolded, better than most people can roll at all. And I'm serious about that. It's one of the things he does. He rolls blindfolded.
Shitty thing about Ted getting busted, eh?
Oh man.
Man, I seen this protest in front of Victoria, and it makes so much sense. I'm a person that needs 500 milligrams of edibles in a day if I'm going to do the edible thing instead of smoking.
Right.
I could not eat 50 treats at 10 milligrams. I could not even afford it on the disability pension that I am on because of my scoliosis.
It'd be very unhealthy to do that.
Oh, it'd be like diabetes. It'd be like the government made you sick again. So,
Yeah, there seems to be a theme going on with making people sick, and then profiting off
take
them.
the weed and irradiate it and put some chemicals on it. Let the people smoke it, and they'll get sick again. It's stupid.
But on a lighter note, I got the whole show to talk about how horrible things are, and they are. But tell us about the cup. We call it the friendly cup. Did it live up to its reputation?
Oh, it did, and we missed you. But
I missed being there for sure.
We played the video.
I heard that.
Yeah, and people were crying.
Mike Rita said it moved him to tears.
Mike Rita moved to tears.
Shout out to Mike. I mean, I saw some of the videos. As always, what a stellar job that guy does.
He's a great man.
Yes.
He's a great man.
He's a great communicator.
Yeah.
And funny as hell.
Yep. I got one of the videos on my phone is him rolling a joint. We call it Mike Rita's Rolling Joint 101.
I see.
So, yeah, we had a good time.
Yeah, I love Mike.
Oh, yeah.
One of my experiences with Mike is we were driving around Vancouver at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh. And he wants something from a 7-Eleven, so we go to the 7-Eleven, and this homeless guy comes to the car and asked us for something, and we end up in quite a conversation with him. We took him inside, bought him a coffee and stuff, and he told us a little bit about himself, curled our hair a little bit, and people need to be understanding of those people that are in those situations like that. You never know who they are and where they're from and what brought them to where they are at that point in their lives. And I'll tell you, there but for the grace of God go any one of us, right? Like you never know. And a lot of these people, they're inspirations, if you really look at what they've been through, that they could even have survived at all.
Some of them have even fought wars and they're on the street and stuff like that.
Amazing careers that many of them have had, and so many stories that they can tell you.
Bankers.
And in a lot of cases, these are the abused children of our society. And in a lot of cases with the people, especially with the opioid crisis, is that...
Ashley, please.
Oh, you got...
Yes.
Well, I thought we had one over there.
No, thank you.
Oh, not prepared for the 420 session here. But yeah, it's it's a sad thing that these groups of prohibitionists those that are pulling the strings and those that are willing to have their strings pulled.
Yeah.
That they're willing to use those people. I don't like to call them those people, but the people that are down in their luck, and the people that are struggling and struggling with the issues of poverty and issues of finding the drugs that will work for them, and that kind of stuff. They're scapegoated. They're the ones that the prohibitionists point at and go, here's why we have to make weed illegal, because if your youngster goes and smokes a joint, they're going to turn out like them. And that's completely not true. There's a whole lot of other factors that are involved with somebody ending up, where they end up there.
I've been smoking 38 years. I have a house. I don't live in a cardboard box, right? So
how long have I been smoking?
True of everybody, right?
Been smoking. What's 45, 48. Coming up to 48 years now that I've been ingesting cannabis.
Yes, ingesting, smoking.
And I'm in my 50th year of having quit cigarettes.
Ooh.
How about that?
Wow, I'm coming up on 18 years.
I was 13 years old when I quit cigarettes.
Wow, I was 13 when I started.
I was 10 when I started.
Stopped at 37.
I grew up in East Vancouver here.
Oh, wow.
And it was just,
it was the cool thing
a way to be accepted. It was the cool thing to do.
And then the earring in the ear.
I didn't have no earrings. I go back a little farther than that. Nobody had earrings back in those days. And even then, I wouldn't have known what was the right or wrong side, or what, wear it in the middle, because there you swing both ways. I have no idea, but no.
I still have my hole.
No, we didn't do, there wasn't that going on to rebel, but there was smoking.
Yeah.
And I was certainly rebelling against strict religious parents, and I was trying to fit in where, in a dangerous place. Schoolyard is a dangerous place. And so, I wanted to be somebody that, would be respected a little bit by my peers, and not respect my parents, because I was part of it. So I started smoking cigarettes at 10 years of age, and I really smoked well over a pack a day.
Wow.
For those 3 years.
Wow.
To the point where it had definitely affected my health.
Yeah.
And when my cousin made the National Hockey League, Keith Magnuson, through his brother, I got sent equipment so that I could play hockey as well. And I was out there as a teenager wearing adult pads. And that first day of trying to make the team, where the coaches are picking from the 150 kids that are skating around, I'll take that kid, I'll take that kid, I'll take... Well, I was having trouble keeping up. And I was a good skater. I'd been skating for a long time.
Because you were smoking.
And... but I wasn't doing any competitive skating. I was just going around in circles. And so when it was time to I got to skate fast, and we're going through pylons, and we're trying to impress these guys that are picking teams. Well, I was coughing and hacking, and I could feel like there was a steel band wrapped around my chest. And so I remember the moment like it was yesterday. I said to myself, that's cigarettes. That's what cigarettes is doing to me. Mm-hmm. And if that's what's going to happen, I quit. That I never smoked another cigarette that day. From that day on. From that day on, I never smoked another cigarette in my life.
For 3 years.
I had been smoking for 3 years. I quit that day, highly motivated. I did smoke a cigar on a subsequent Halloween, maybe a year or two later, with some friends, and was equally disgusted, and didn't do that again either.
But a year later, that was really hard on the lungs.
It makes you dizzy. I mean, if you're not a cigarette smoker, I mean, a cigarette will make you dizzy as can be. A cigar will really
our parents, when they found out we used to smoke, we would smoke. They get us to smoke a cigar or a whole pack of cigarettes to sort of teach us not to smoke. Remember that? And I remember that. I knew a few kids who puked on cigars.
We never rehearse anything on the show. This is all completely spontaneous. Glenn shows up. Smoke a pack of cigarettes to teach you better, eh? I was 10 years old. I was at my grandfather's gas station down here on just off of Victoria Drive. It's called Victoria Drive Station. It was an Esso station. Go there every Saturday with my dad. One of the things I did as a 10-year-old is I used to like to smoke things. I used to pretend to smoke things. Like other people were smoking. They were looking cool. And my dad didn't like that at all. He was really mad about that. And so my grandfather asked me to clean up the yard. He was going to pay me something, a quarter or something, to clean up the yard. And I don't mean grass yard. I mean the gas station, paved area there, right? Yeah. And my dad had gone somewhere with my uncle. My dad was not a smoker. My uncle was.
Yeah.
And so when they came back in, I was picking up garbage around the grandpa's gas station.
Yeah.
My dad saw that, made up his mind before even asking me anything about it, jumped out of the car and had grabbed a pack of cigarettes off my uncle, took me into the bathroom and made me smoke a whole bunch of cigarettes.
Oh, really?
That's what happened to me. Didn't teach me not to smoke.
No,
I wasn't a smoker at that time. I'd smoke some hay out in the field, pick out some of the dried grass and it was a tube and smoke some of that harsh stuff once in a while. And, and I had been picking up cigarette butts and pretending a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think we even had, candies that looked like cigarettes and I'd pretend to smoke those. Popeye ones,
Popeye smokes, yeah.
And my parents didn't like that, but I wasn't a smoker.
No.
But that day my dad took me in the bathroom, made me smoke down a whole bunch of cigarettes. And that's what started me smoking at 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I smoked every day after that for a long. I stole my cigarettes. It was a horrible thing.
Wow.
But
See, I started smoking.
he thought he was doing the right thing, I'm sure.
I was smoking in group homes. My mom had gave me permission to smoke at 13 in the group homes, and that's where I started because the other kids were smoking too. I was doing the peer thing, right? Trying to fit in, 13 years old. Yeah.
It was the way it was. And I'm just lucky. I'm just so lucky in my mind that my cousin made the National Hockey League, and that really meant something to me.
Yeah.
And I was that motivated to, once I thought that's what's making it so I'm not going to play hockey, I quit. I quit Never made the National Hockey League.
No.
But
you got to play hockey afterwards.
I played a lot of hockey. It changed my life, I'll tell you. I was running with some guys that ended up in gangs in Surrey there back in the 70s, going to school in junior high, and I was on a bit of a bad track. And yet when my cousin sent me equipment to play hockey with, that brought me a whole new different group of friends and different things to focus on. And it really did change my life in a very profound, positive way for sure. It's been a big part of my life. So I
play a little bit of hockey too, so it changed my life too.
I don't play anymore. I can't play anymore because of my thumbs.
I can't.
I have bad arthritis.
If I was to fall on my bum, my scoliosis would just probably wipe me out and would never walk again. So.
I don't think I have the energy for it anymore now. But I had to quit years ago. I thought I was going to be an old timer that was going to kick butt out there because I was, I could skate really well, and I think I'm going to keep that. But my thumbs went on me. I've got really bad arthritis. I don't know if you can see, but I've got these all caved in here. I don't have muscles on my thumb.
Yeah.
It works a little bit. It hurts most of the time.
Most of the time, eh?
But when it really hurts is when you got a hockey stick in your hand and somebody gives you a pass and the puck hits the stick and whoa!
I forgot about that,
So even stick handling, knocking that thing back and forth on the end of a rod out there is like just excruciating. Can't do it. Can't shoot the puck. Can't take a pass.
Wow.
No point in playing. I can skate around out there, but that's it.
Still ref.
I could ref. I don't know. Who knows what the future holds?
One of those games that we used to play as kids, and you go, we did the plastic one.
Well, there again, I see your thumbs and wrists going, and that's not going to work. That's not going to work for me. I tried to learn guitar, and I couldn't do that either, just because of how bad these things are in here. Anyway, it is what it is. It got me a medical license to use cannabis, so there you go.
There you go.
All right, Glenn. Well, that was a great session. Really good to have you back.
We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
All right.
Have as much fun as you can.
I won't be blocked anymore. Yay!
Yeah, exactly. Back on social media.
Back on social media as of Sunday.
Exactly. Absolutely. Have as much fun as you can.
All right, thanks.
All right. And now we have our Martin medical moment on the show here. Very happy that we're able to have this segment because we need this because of what I was talking about earlier. The war against the sick and the suffering Canadians that need access to cannabis for medical reasons is still waging hard. They may have legalized it so you can go and buy weed off of Trudeau's dealers if you want inferior, overpriced, overpackaged, suspect weed. But what they've really done is a full-on assault on the medical users of cannabis as a result of this so-called legalization that we have here. And one of the things that had been happening that caused legalization, that was one of the main points that we had that we were making, was the inroads that we had made through the courts and through the courts of public opinion and through activism to push forward the need and the access to cannabis with respect to storefronts and high dose edibles and topicals and suppositories and good quality cannabis at affordable affordable prices for people, because if you're using it for medical purposes, you're a daily user. And a daily user, the costs really add up fast when you have to pay prohibition prices for something. And so that these dispensaries were compassionate in every aspect of it, and they are the ones that have really been put out of business because of so-called legalization. We call this the Martin medical moment because one of the lead issues with respect to the fight for medical cannabis has been going on since they busted a dispensary in small town Saskatchewan, in Whitewood, Saskatchewan, where a compassionate fellow named Jerry Martin had been trying to help out his community with access to cannabis for medical purposes, and doing a pretty good job of that for about 3 or so years or 4 years. And as strict as he could to what Health Canada was, looking like they were wanting with respect to how cannabis should be dispensed for medical purposes, urged on by court decisions that said that storefront access was crucial and at the heart of access for medical patients. Spurred on by other dispensaries opening up all across Canada, many in Vancouver here, where there was well over 150 dispensaries not licensed in any way, but offering cannabis for medical purposes, many of them, most of them, adhering to pretty strict guidelines with respect to having a doctor-confirmed diagnosis and other things like that as to who could access the cannabis there. And in Jerry's case, with the Martin Medical Services that was shut down in Whitewood, Saskatchewan after 4 years, he's still facing his day in court, and it's been torture for him. But they're dragging this out and holding over his head the prospect of jail time, having already seized much of his property and belongings. And there's a constitutional fight going on because of this, because Jerry and Paul Lewin, his lawyer, are bringing a constitutional challenge against the shutting down of these dispensaries and the blocking of people getting access. And that's still yet to come. And very happy that we're able to have Jerry on the show, and he can give us a personal update on that and other things that are going on with him. And then we have a few other reports on some of the other cases going on across Canada. So Jerry's here with me. How you doing, Jerry?
I'm doing good, and you?
Well, that's good. I'm doing good too.
Good.
Any day above ground is a good day, so my dad used to say. I know some days are better than others, but if I'm here behind the mic, I'm not homesick, and if I'm homesick, I'm still, I guess, having a good day because I'm not not 6 feet under. It's all perspective for sure. We left it last time that they're still setting a court date. Everything seems to be in order. Looks like they said spring, but the longer it's delayed, it's later and later in the spring, I would imagine. Anything new on that?
No, not really. I haven't heard anything really much on that at all.
I see.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's in their court, right? Like and will they be announcing
Paul did call the other day. He said they're reviewing all the materials, and they brought on the other Crown now that's a little more familiar with cannabis cases. So
I see.
Yeah, so
maybe I should call him too then.
Yeah, give him a call.
We should call these people and talk to them because they're public servants. And I don't think that going forward with these cannabis cases is representative of what the Canadian public want. And so we should let them know what, that we don't want this. This is a criminal misuse of public funds. I don't know how we'd ever even estimate how much has been billed because of the shutdown of your dispensary.
I can imagine.
It's got to be huge.
It's got to be millions. They had agents out of Bogota, Colombia following me, and Peru, and I mean, it's the amount of stuff that they put into the disclosure and into arresting me is ridiculous. Since I said on the front page of the newspaper I was selling cannabis, like how much evidence do you need? So yeah.
How many court appearances so far?
41 now.
41 times. Every one of those is a big chunk of our cash that they're spending, for sure.
Sure it is. Everybody's got to show up, and get all your.
Well, and the court has to be paid. The court workers have to be paid. Yeah. The lights, alone probably cost us quite a bit there to turn the lights on in the courtroom there. The judge, he makes $250,000 a year to
rule on half the stuff.
It's so insane. Yeah. Robin Neufeld is the name of the prosecutor that's been handling this case for quite a while. Please give him a call. And
he'd love to hear from you.
And I'm wondering if every time he gets a call, that he builds some more for it, you know?
I think it builds a little more anger in that.
You know,
guy.
puts a, you did what?
A little more anger in him.
Well,
That's good.
well, no, it's not. He's not supposed to be biased at all in anything to do with this. He's supposed to be a reasoned person, you would think, in that position. I would hope that's what we're putting into those positions. But I'm more wondering if he's not billing us for every phone call. Like, how much is he billing? How much has he made off of the bust of your dispensary in these?
$1.5 million is in the
It's been over 3 years now, right? Didn't we just you just passed an anniversary, didn't you? 3 years or something?
3 years, November 8th, yeah.
Since the bust. He's been on the case since the beginning.
Yeah.
I just wonder how much he's billed on that particular file.
Yeah, I wonder.
Wonder how much that is.
Probably a lot.
Probably a lot.
Yeah.
Wow. Insanity. Corruption. It's insane. And going on not just with you, but with a bunch of other people as well. I alluded to that off the top. There's these other cases that are going on. Chris N's case in Halifax was adjourned. So just another time to come to court, pay everybody, and let's. I'm not sure what that means. We'll find out from Chris what that means.
He's really good with his cases, though, and he's level-headed, and he tends to do well. He seems to be doing some other challenge because of that. He's really good at that sort of stuff.
Right, and there's also Heidi Chartrand.
Yeah.
In Nova Scotia as well, and hers has been put off until December 20th. And so show some support for these people, on these in these courtrooms. It's good to have people show up and be a presence, to look the judges in the eye and look the prosecutors in the eye and see what you find in there, see if they can, if you can maybe get inside there a little bit and show them.
Ted's place go there.
Exactly.
Been there a long time.
We hadn't talked about that yet. The Victoria Buyers Club, raided by the CSU. I believe they were opened again right away.
Yeah, I believe so.
Good for them. Just disgusting. Just absolutely disgusting. One of the original dispensaries forever. There's a debate as to whether or not it was that one or this one or the one in California. But because there's a debate, it doesn't matter. Right. They are one of the originals from right there at the very beginning of all of this.
Well, people came up from California, I'm sure. But,
I've seen lots of different conversation about it, and to me, it doesn't matter at all. I mean, I think according to the Bible, Jesus Christ was distributing cannabis and dispensing cannabis probably long before any of these guys in the dispensaries and through shamans and the Zoroastrians and through the Middle East and other cultures that have been using cannabis, and in China for 5,000 years they've been using cannabis. So I don't think anybody really gets to claim to be the first dispensary if it's within the last couple hundred years. But they're in the conversation for sure with respect to the modern day dispensaries that operate in North America here. Ted's Vancouver or Victoria Buyers Club was right there at the very beginning of all of that. Very humble beginnings, but a very big heart that just kept on helping people and couldn't stop helping people, and turned it into an amazing organization with thousands of members. And yet here the government thinks there's some good reason for shutting that down. I'm beyond words for it. It's
they can't seem to make any money, so I don't understand why they're shutting down the ones that are making money.
That too.
They could just tax them. What's the?
I believe and I hope that the reason they're not making any money is because the general public realizes that cannabis shouldn't be $10 a gram or anything above that. It should be well below that because it's simply a vegetable, a plant. It's something that grows in a garden. The actual cost of production is not
stocks and things like that. It destroys the value of any product.
Well, and you start putting 4 different levels of taxation on it, and everybody wants a cut every step of the way.
Tax here, I believe, on vapes and all those sort of things, like 20% or something.
It's all just a smoke screen. It's all just an illusion. They're worried about the damage being caused by vapes. Absolutely minuscule compared to the damage being caused by alcohol and cigarettes, just to name 2. And there's a whole bunch of other things. Bound to be some harms. I'm all for figuring out, what's causing the harm, and let's figure out if we can regulate that and find a way to help that, because for sure, why wouldn't we do that? That's the point of regulations.
Right.
But all of this media misinformation and hype about this is nothing but a money-making distraction. I mean, they're going to have approved pens coming out from all these licensed producers that are safe, of course.
But we know they're not safe.
And they're going to make a fortune. They're going to make an absolute fortune on cannabinoids, on just concentrates. They think they're making big money at charging $12 a gram and getting $5,000 a pound, while they can take that same pound of weed, turn it into concentrates, put it into these cheap pens made in China, and they're going to make a hell of a lot more per pound. And that's what they're seeing, is that the concentrates can make them a lot more than what even the plants and the flowers are making them. It's despicable. It's so corrupt. And that our public servants would be a part of that, well, at least we have that to stand on platforms and scream about. And if the media starts paying attention, if they ever come and bust the CSP, which we're going to open a dispensary and try to conform to what the city says they will allow.
You find a place yet?
I thought I did on Sunday. I thought I had it nailed down. It wouldn't have been perfect for our needs, but it would have been good temporarily.
Right.
But it was a collective of artists that had a space that they weren't using during the week.
Oh, okay.
And I thought I made them offers they couldn't refuse and gave them safeguards that it should alleviate their concerns. But there was a 9-member board and then 18 members involved. And after hours of discussion with those people, once we had had our meeting with them and made our offer, they said they didn't want to take the risk. And that was that for that. I made them a counter offer and they still didn't. So that's okay. Probably not meant for us if that's the case, right? Yeah. And I'm looking at another one tomorrow, and maybe that'll be a fit for us, and we'll see. But we're going to move into a storefront, and I'll talk a bit about that on the CSP update coming up. So, other than that, there is Sarah McNeil that has her constitutional challenge final arguments coming up in February in a courtroom in Red Deer. So find out that date and go and support that if you're anywhere in the area. And all of these things are things that we can do to try to influence the way things end up shaking down. And we've had pretty good successes in the courts. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the support that's been there and the people that have come out to support. So let's put that on our calendars and make sure that if we can, we go and let our public servants know what we think is right and wrong in a world that so far is pretty wrong in how they're doing things. So, thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next week, and have as much fun as you can till then.
All right.
All right.
See ya.
See ya. Well, that brings us to our main guest. And
Grab the mic if you want.
oh yeah, maybe I should.
Do you want to run this Dylan video first?
We could do that. Okay. Before we just.
Hello guys, how are you doing today? My name's Dylan McCardle, and I am down here at Georgia and Howe. Today I'm starting a protest for 24/7 until they arrest me, on behalf of all Canadian citizens and all cannabis community that has been persecuted by these new laws, the new Cannabis Act, Bill C-43, I believe. They have been shutting down mom and pop shops. They have not given us opportunity to show what reasonable access can be within these communities, and that's a shame because the Supreme Court of Canada said every Canadian citizen deserves reasonable access to cannabis. Until they are willing to give reasonable access to cannabis, until they are willing to stop shutting down the shops, and till the CSU is shut down and John Horgan and Justin Trudeau have stopped their oppressive actions on our community, I will be down at the Vancouver Art Gallery on Georgia and Howe, standing off the police. Come on down, show your support, come get high, smoke a joint, enjoy the vibes, enjoy the music, and I hope to see you guys really soon. We need to make a change in this community. High-dose edibles help so many people, and the people that are being harmed by the government's continued attack on local businesses are the disabled, the people affected by the opiate crisis, and the people who really can't afford the recreational prices at this time. So I really hope that you guys can come down and support. I don't want to see any more shops raided. So, thank you. Have a good one. Free the weed.
So that's Dylan, part of the 420 Farmers Market, and you heard what he had to say there. Please go down and support him if you can. We should have some other vendors there. We should make this point and keep making it. We've been making it for years. The 420 Farmers Market has been popping up and providing access and being shut down for a number of different in a number of different locations for the last 4 or 5 years. And they're still doing it. Thornton Park on Saturday and Sunday, I saw that they had tents set up there where they were providing access to people. And Dylan's there at the art gallery, and he's providing high-dose edibles, some of it on behalf of the CSP. He's one of our supporters, and we support him, and we support the access being supplied by him and his group in the face of all of these dispensaries being shut down and the edible supply being cut off. So very happy to have Dylan there. Go and support him if you can. So yeah, very happy to have as my main guest on the show today, Dr. M.J. Milloy. He's the cannabis professor from UBC that has a very interesting job of looking into cannabinoids and how they could be used as harm reduction and things like that. But I'm going to let him tell you exactly what it's all about. With no further ado, Dr. Malloy, very pleased to have you on the program.
Thanks, Neil. Great to see you again, and very pleased to be with someone who's done such great work in our community with harm reduction in cannabis.
Thank you. We're trying in the face of a war that's being waged on us.
Yeah.
And has been for quite a while.
Yeah.
The war on drugs is no joke, and it was ramped up in the 60s, kind of around the same time when they were defeating the myth that cannabis made people violent and insane, and instead made people calm and relaxed.
Right.
But the war on cannabis is about money. It's about money and control, but most of it comes down to money. It's about ideologies to some respect too. Racism plays a role in there. But it's primarily about money. And when you look at who it is that's fighting against cannabis being accessed easily, and you look at the motives behind it, even when it's ideological, even when it's hate-based, you'll find that there's money interests involved there too. And I guess it's natural for people to hate other people that are going to step in their financial way, Yeah. And so that's kind of what's going on here. Cannabis has been a very valuable commodity for a very long time. For thousands of years, it's been treasured, I'm sure, by people around the world. Here in North America, it was a mandatory crop. In the early forming of the United States, the U.S. government would give land to people with some requirements, and one of those requirements is that they grow cannabis, mostly for its industrial purposes.
Yeah.
But we have George Washington talking about hemp and the Indian hemp, which is more valuable because of its medicinal value. So it certainly was being used for that. And in fact, in the pharmacopoeia, it was like the second most prescribed medicine for a long time in all kinds of different formulations and what have you. And it was the Rockefellers, in my look into history, that were patenting modern medicine in the form of pills and synthetics that subtly in some ways, overtly in other ways, pushed out the herbal medicine purveyors, the schools for herbal medicine, and put their institutes of modern medicine and doctors in white robes and pills for everything into universities, and that has become the norm. And it's kind of since those days, I mean, there was some angst against cannabis used against some groups prior to that in the border states, but it was kind of around that time when the real war against cannabis happened, and basically because it was such a threat, not just to the Rockefellers' pharmaceutical interests, but also their fuel interests, two really big dollar makers. And so we've had this war waged against us for an extremely long time. It's been brutal, paralleling with fights for freedom and rights, and it's kind of at the forefront in many ways of those battles. And we've come a long way, and the fact that you're sitting here is a big example of just how far we've come. That's for sure, because we've got the government saying that we won, the legalizers won, and now we're going to have legalized cannabis for everybody. Hidden in the details is that they're going to monopolize the sale of cannabis and continue the war against anyone who would distribute against their model, and even users that would have illegal cannabis, and unfortunately against the medical people that are using cannabis for medical purposes. But in this whole very interesting war, they have claimed defeat and presented legalization, and as a result of that, one of the groups that got licenses to produce cannabis was able to fund, well, you tell me. Now it's getting more technical, and I don't want to make mistakes about how I describe this.
Okay, right.
But they've placed you into this position. And what is the position, and how did you get to be there?
Well, that's a good question. And so about this time last year, I was announced as the first Canopy Growth Professor of Cannabis Science at the university. And this was a position that was created at UBC by a gift to the university from Canopy Growth, of course, a licensed producer, and the government of British Columbia's Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. And the idea behind it is quite simple, is that, as you know, there's increasing science out there suggesting that cannabis is effective harm reduction, and that cannabis might be another tool for us to fight back against the opioid crisis.
So is that pretty much your mandate then?
That is my mandate.
Is to look into the viability of cannabis as a harm reduction tool?
Yeah. Both
Very
in the
cool.
sort of the idea about how you and other folks on the ground, on the front lines are doing it, sort of distributing it for free as harm reduction.
Right.
And as you know, there's a very there's a great history in Vancouver of frontline activists saving lives with harm reduction interventions.
Yep.
Whether we talk about needle exchange in the 80s, whether we talk about Insight and the supervised injection facilities later on. And now I think what we're seeing is cannabis is sort of the next wave of that harm reduction.
I see them as very parallel situations.
Yeah.
And back in those days, like you said, there was those other solutions. And this time, at least part of the solution is to have easy access, low barrier access to high dose edibles.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been finding with the CSP, and I'm sure you're finding the same thing, that cannabis in its smoked form, just the flowers, really isn't enough for most people to get through the withdrawals or to replace the use of the opioids. Because you really can't smoke too much flower.
That's right.
You know, a couple of grams of the best flower, and that third gram's really not going to do much more for you. You're pretty much where you're going to be.
Yeah.
But with the concentrates, you can green out.
Yeah.
And with the edibles, you can really eat too much edibles and have, be almost comatose for a couple of days. It won't kill you, thankfully, and that there's no record of anybody dying in that position. But as most of our clientele, and that's in the hundreds at the CSP, have found out, you can eat too much cannabis and it's not a very pleasant thing.
Yeah, sure.
But the good news with that is because you can eat too much, you can find that right dose. There's a dose lower than that that's going to deal with the pain issues that most of these people are dealing with, be it emotional, physical, whatever.
Yeah. And so that's the study that we released today. We since about the mid-1990s, UBC has been running a study in the downtown east side.
Yep.
People at risk of overdose, at risk of HIV, people who use drugs. And the study we found today was quite simply found that the people in the study who are living with chronic pain, if they use cannabis every day, they're far less likely to use illicit opioids every day.
Right. This is in direct conflict with what McMaster University came out with, I think, today. Did you see that?
I did see that. I had a chance to sort of skim some of it. Certainly, they didn't include our work in their review of work.
Right. And they were just reviewing other people's work.
They were. And I'm not sure if they included... So we had a study that we published last year, which looked at people on methadone and found, in fact, that when people were starting methadone, if they were using cannabis every day, they were far more likely to still be on methadone at 6 months.
So why wouldn't McMaster have that information, and why wouldn't that be forefront in what they were
Well,
presenting?
I don't know if they included that study in their review.
I'm saying, why wouldn't they, though? I mean, is there any logical reason for that?
I would hope that they would. The difference, they may not have included it because the thing they were interested in was the frequency of opioid use. And we didn't look at that. We looked at whether or not people stayed on methadone.
I have anecdotal evidence from Van Du where people on the board have come to me and told me that they use less when they're using cannabis. It allows them to use less. I've always been under the understanding that cannabis for many drugs is an amplifier. Is that the case? Have you found that to be the case?
I think when we look at the opioids, I think what we're seeing is consistent with what you've heard, is that there's a lot of people who are telling us, either intentionally or just as a matter of the way their drug consumption works, that if they're using cannabis, they're able to use less of other drugs. Right. The best example we have is we started a number of years ago to do urine drug screens with our participants. Not because we think that they're not telling us the truth when they tell us about their drug use, but rather because one of the hallmarks of the opioid crisis is that people often don't know when they've been exposed to fentanyl, right? Right. They buy a flap of down. They don't really know what's in there. It used to be mostly heroin. Now we're pretty sure it's been largely replaced. And what we found was that people who had THC in their urine were far less likely to have fentanyl in their urine. So maybe that's because they're able to substitute. Maybe it's because they're using less opioids and so they're less likely to be exposed. But I think it's consistent with what you've been told by people at Vandu, that they're able to use less opioids to deal with their pain, to deal with their trauma, to deal with many of the reasons that they're using.
And we also have a lot of people that tell us that they're no longer using any of those, and they're just using either what we give them or what they're able to use, what we give them to supplement they have other sources for edibles as well. But cannabis is dangerous, isn't it? I mean, they got to use the criminal law to protect people from cannabis. I've heard lots of different doctors talk about all kinds of crazy things to do with the dangers of cannabis. Of course, with our program, we're trying to demonstrate the efficacy of cannabis and the safety of it by giving people just huge amounts and letting them do what they want with it and then seeing what happens.
But look, the idea of substitution, which is essentially what you're doing, is enshrined in our medical approaches to opioid addiction.
It should be.
No, but it already is.
And it's more than harm reduction.
Because
it isn't really going from something that's causing harm to something that's just causing less harm.
Right.
For the most part, for the vast amount of users, there's no harm involved in using cannabis. Once they figure out the right dose and don't eat too much or use too much, then it just works for them. It gives them that peace of mind or relaxation or relief from pain or ability to sleep is so important. The increased appetite is so important for some of these people. So many different benefits to it. It's almost incorrect to call it harm reduction.
Right.
It almost should be called harm elimination tool, and it should even be better than that. It's a replacement that provides a whole bunch of benefits. Yeah. I mean, I'm told, I've never had an addiction to opioids.
Sure.
And I've had some experience with them, and maybe it could be called addiction. I mean, I was taking Percocets and Percodans out of medicine cabinets where we were going in as an insurance restoration company, and these things were supposed to be thrown in the garbage.
Right.
But my uncle had found some value in them, so I started taking them, and wow, I'd get really, really wired on these things to the point of throwing up. Yeah. And then I'd say, enough, never again.
Yeah.
And then, but I wouldn't throw away the big bottle of them that I'd been accumulating. And then however long later, a couple of weeks later, I'd be just thinking back to just how high I got and how much numb I was from the things that were bothering me. And I'd go back, I'd just take a quarter of a pill, I'd take half a pill. And by the time I'm taking a full pill or a pill and a half, I'm back to throwing up again. I wasn't in that cycle for very long, probably less than a year. But at the end of it, I took the big bottle that I had and I poured it out into the toilet and I flushed them all away. And and now I find out those are opioids. I didn't even realize that at all. So maybe I did have a thing going on with opioids to know. But I'm really told by people that have, are in that and have been out of that cannabis has saved their life, that it helped them through withdrawal, especially the edibles, and that it is, they find a level of using it. Some people it's concentrate, some people it's edibles, but that's what they now use in their life. And they've not only gotten into the opioids, but a lot of other prescription medicine as well. It's really far more than a harm reduction tool. Most of the people that I'm sure all the people in our lineup will tell you that it's just an absolute wonderful benefit in their life. They can't thank us enough for getting their little care pack, and you can see it in their eyes.
Well,
and
I mean,
faces.
the work that you do is great, and it obviously touches a lot of lives.
So back to dangerous.
Right.
You must be looking into that too. You must have that information at your disposal, what these other people are saying. Is there any merit to the fears about cannabis in triggering schizophrenia, for example? And actually, I don't even talk about triggering seems to be not that bad a thing to have happen, because then at least you know you have it and you can mitigate that that situation. But that it's causational for schizophrenia, or that it's causing brain damage. That's the worst one. In my mind, that's a hate crime. Right. That's saying that myself and millions of other Canadians that have used cannabis extensively in our youth, I used lots of cannabis, and that's what they're saying. If you use lots of cannabis, you're going to damage the developing brain. Yeah. I think that's a hate crime. They're saying that we're all running around brain damaged here, and I don't appreciate that very much. It could keep me from getting a good job or becoming a talk show host or something. People won't trust me if they think I'm brain damaged. But is there any, what kind of merit is there to these claims? I'm sure everything can be harmful if really used inappropriately, but I mean...
Well, I think everyone's different, and certainly
good point.
A lot of people are using cannabis without any apparent ill effects. Then we have to be sensitive to the fact that it doesn't treat some people very well.
Good answer right away. I'm glad you're here to answer this for me, because you have not let me down.
So some colleagues in Toronto a number of years ago did a study where they tried to estimate how many deaths were caused by cannabis in Canada in 1 year period, and the number they came up with was 192. That was the number of estimated deaths.
Is that from driving impaired, perhaps?
That was from driving, schizophrenia, and cardiovascular disease.
Does the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome play a role in that at all?
They did not include that. They did not.
Which I think has the potential to kill people.
Do you think so? Really? I've not heard that.
Because I've been suffering from it for a long time myself.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older, I don't get it anywhere near as frequently as I did before, and the duration is nowhere near as long.
Right.
And that's probably for a number of different factors. I try to be careful about my intake.
Yep.
I think just by the things that I've heard and read, that it's probably more a result of pesticides, fertilizers, improperly flushed cannabis as opposed to actual cannabinoids themselves. But I have suffered from that, and I went for 20 years probably, maybe 3 times every 2 years, having a bout that would be 7 to 10 days long. The first 4 or 5 days are just constant vomiting.
Yeah.
Although after the first day, there's nothing left to vomit. I'm certainly not able to eat anything.
Yeah.
But the retching won't stop unless I get into hot water. And I learned that real quick into it.
Right.
So if I get into a hot tub of water, and showers actually work too. And I didn't even try that for a long time because hot baths worked, and I couldn't really see how showers would be as effective. But in the last few years, I've tried showers when it was happening. And they are actually almost equally as effective as hot baths. But the hot water, for whatever reason, calms my stomach and stops that retching or that flinching.
Yeah.
And then lay in hot water for 45 minutes until the hot water and the exhaustion from vomiting so much gets the better of me, and I start to pass out in the tub or get a kink in my neck or whatever, and then get back into bed, and I can sometime half an hour to 45 minutes, maybe an hour, I would get to fall asleep.
Right.
And then wake up with my legs starting to twitch and my stomach holding on to it, and then back into hot water.
Doesn't sound very pleasant.
Horrible. And the throwing up part is really horrible.
Yeah.
And there's 4 or 5 days of where the stomach will only stop retching with the hot water, and then that calms down, and I pretty much just stay in bed with much less frequent trips to the hot water. Right. And then I'm of course trying to keep my fluids down. I had to learn that early, to find some concoction of something that a little bit of ginger ale, a little bit of Gatorade for those things, and sweetened up with some baking soda, because when it comes back up, it just rips your throat apart unless you've got, if it's sweet and not harsh, then. Yeah. And all those things I learned to be able to keep down some of that, or when it does come back up, it's not hurting me so much. But I've thought about it at those times when I was frail and weak, that if I was older and more frail and more weak, that one of these bouts could probably kill me, and probably has killed people in the past. I don't know. Yeah. But as I've gotten older, I've also, as I said, had less incidents of it. And so there's no recordings of deaths because of it.
Not that I've heard. It's really not well understood.
Although there is one recently. There was a news article where a woman said her 17-year-old son vomited himself to death, and that's what they're attributing it to. So my son sent it to me and said maybe it's the first death from cannabis. Yeah, so 192 deaths attributed to behaviors relating to cannabis, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean,
anything to do with actually cannabis killing them itself?
No.
Nothing
As
like
you
that.
know, sort of overdose is thought to be impossible. It's never been documented.
The LD50 rating is 1,500 pounds in 10 minutes.
Exactly, which
Hard to attain.
it's difficult to obtain.
I think that you'd probably die for other reasons if you tried to ingest that much
That's right.
in the cannabinoids.
But I think the point is that, cannabis is not risk-free. But when we compare it to other legal substances,
There you go, yeah.
The burden that it places on Canada's health and well-being is certainly far less than alcohol and tobacco
and even the pharmaceutical
other
drugs.
And pharmaceutical drugs. You're right.
Which kill a lot more people than we even realize, and
right.
because there's not really an onus on doctors to report deaths from pharmaceuticals. They usually classify it as something else. So.
Yeah, and as you know, the fentanyl crisis is largely a crisis born of overprescription of opioid analgesics, not properly caring for people who are
or
living
even
with chronic
proper
pain.
prescribing of those things that were maybe not ended properly, or maybe for some people, like you say, we're all different individuals. For some people, very difficult to end properly.
And some people get into trouble with that bottle of Percocet, right? They can't flush it as easily as other people might.
So typically, with my interviews, I start with your history as an individual human being, and so I'm going to be a little late into that at this point.
All right,
but. How did you come to this? Your early influences with becoming a doctor and with cannabis and legalizing all these things.
Well, I was fortunate. I moved to Vancouver in 2005 to start my training.
From where?
At the university. From Montreal.
Primarily.
After my first degree. And I was fortunate in Montreal to be a journalist with my buddy here, Mr. O'Mara. And so really got a great education in cannabis because I had a reporter whose beat was primarily cannabis.
Cool.
And that was back in the late 90s, of course, when Hillary Black was established.
Who was he writing for, do you know?
He was writing for Hour magazine, HOUR, in Montreal, occasionally for Now in Toronto. But his beat was cannabis and covering the establishment of compassion clubs, covering what, of course, Mr. Emery was doing here and others were doing.
The enforcement measures of our government and
all
those
that
things
sort
as
of
well.
Stuff.
Very, very
and,
cool.
The early court decisions and, of course, the 2000 court decision around medical cannabis, which, of course, reaffirmed the right of Canadians to use medical cannabis.
Yeah.
So that was really my first education in the issues around cannabis.
A good education.
It was a great education, you know. And I was very fortunate. I'll never forget covering one of the federal elections, would have been the mid-90s, and fortunate to go to the first Compassion Club in Montreal. And really being blown away by the realization that here were people who were putting their liberty on the line because they believed cannabis was a medicine for some people.
Right.
And it really struck me as such a brave and powerful act. So anyways, I was not a very good journalist, as my friend Jamie will attest, and had to run back to university for more training, and came to Vancouver because I was fascinated by Insight, the supervised injection facility, which you know, of course, and similar things happening, right? People believing this was a worthwhile thing to protect the health of some of our most
You went back for more
vulnerable.
training, and what kind of training did you get?
Epidemiology. So the study
What does that mean?
it's the study of diseases in community. It's the study of trying to understand what causes disease and what we can do to prevent disease or prevent death.
I see.
So I went to UBC. I did a master's and a PhD there, working with the scientists who evaluated Insight and showed what benefits it had for so many of our fellow citizens here in Vancouver.
Right.
And all that time I thought to myself, cannabis, unimportant. I'm not going to study it. I'm studying folks who are into heroin and into crack and doing all that sort of stuff. Cannabis really isn't that important.
Right.
But then, in 2011, I was working on a study of people living with HIV. And heard about these interesting experiments that were being done down in New Orleans by these researchers who were experimenting on monkeys to try and understand how HIV works in the body. And what they did is they took the monkeys and they gave them the monkey version of HIV, and then they injected them with heroin. And what they found, of course, was that the monkeys who had heroin injections did worse in terms of their HIV than the monkeys that weren't on heroin. They did the same with alcohol. They did the same with cocaine. They started doing something with THC, and they found that the monkeys on THC did better than the monkeys who didn't have the THC injections.
Nice.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can see the same thing in our human study. So I went back to our data, and I found the very same thing. That the folks who were using cannabis around the time that they became infected had lower amounts of HIV in their body if they were using cannabis at least once a day. And so that was a real eye-opener for me, an eye-opener around the endocannabinoid system, around the sort of the possible benefits of cannabis. And then, of course, the overdose crisis hit, and the need for us to do more to try and protect the lives of people living here in Vancouver. So that's really where it started, and that's why we're doing the work we're doing now.
I see.
Yeah.
So Canopy Growth put you into this position?
Well, no. I mean, Canopy Growth gave the money to the university, and the university hired me.
I see. So the university hired you.
They did.
How did that happen? Did you apply for it?
I did. They put out a call. They said, this is a new position. We want someone who wants to research the possible benefits of medical cannabis. And so I put my name forward, and I was fortunate.
Nice. So do you have students?
I do. I've got 2 PhD students, a number of master's students, and some physicians as well who work with me.
I see.
Yeah.
And you have ongoing studies. That's kind of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you're also investigating to some degree, I would imagine.
We are.
So that's
the studies that we're doing, we have these big studies of people who live in the downtown east side, and we're trying to understand sort of the benefits for them of cannabis use. And we found a number of things. The pain study I talked about earlier, we found the methadone study. And on Monday at the event we're holding at UBC, where I'm very glad and fortunate that you're going to join us and talk about some of your experience. At that event, I'll sort of be going over some of our findings and talking about the next steps in our research, which will include studies where we give people cannabis and try to see if we can replicate the same benefits.
Likely in the form of high-dose edibles and other forms?
I imagine. You know, we're still
because
trying
that's
to...
really important. That's what I've, in my experience with the Herb School back in 2004, leading up to the Cannabis Substitution Project, it was always the edibles that would really work. Mm-hmm. I mean, in smoked form, it's valuable. It does mitigate some things for people, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
But the edibles was the real ticket. That
it is.
The mantra was, a couple of good, strong edibles, I can get right through the night. That's what they would tell us. They'd come in there, be lined up in the morning, and they'd say, a couple of good, strong edibles, I can get right through the day, right through the night.
And that's withdrawal, that's sleep, that's all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they would tell us, they would curl our hair with the stories they would tell us. There are many of these people as to how they ended up down there.
Sure.
They'd bring us to tears because they were so genuine in their appreciation for us being there. And that the other comment that was made frequently was it put them on a different path.
Right.
That the path that they were on, the repetitive, we're all about patterns and repeating patterns, and the patterns that they'd been involved with having to go score some heroin and then do the heroin and then
get back on the wheel.
Exactly.
Back on the grind.
That what happened when they got cannabis was it put them on a different track. All of a sudden now they weren't going and doing that, they were doing this instead, and they were eating where they wouldn't be eating otherwise, and they were sleeping when they wouldn't otherwise be sleeping. And it was very powerful change in direction for people for sure.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Just before we move any farther,
the
event at UBC on the 25th.
That's right.
How do people find it? What is the time and the place?
So the time is 8 a.m. I believe we're pretty close
early
to
that day,
No, you don't have to get up that early.
Oh, okay.
The time is 8 a.m. We're going to kick it off. I believe your panel is going to be around 9:30.
Okay.
We're pretty close to full. But the good news is that there's a webcast, and so people can...
so they can find it how?
So I would go to the bccsu.ca. And there'll be information on that website about how to get onto the webcast. We're calling it the Research Symposium on Cannabis for Harm Reduction.
I'm very slow. You have to give me that website.
bccsu.ca.
U.ca.
Yeah.
And just in case anybody else out there is slow as well.
bccsu.ca.
And it's
Cannabis Research Symposium.
Nice.
Yeah, and there's going to be a webcast so people can log in and they can look at one of the talks, all the talks, whatever they like, and we'll also be archiving those webcasts. So if people don't catch it on Monday, they can go back to the website later on.
They can stream it anytime they want.
Stream it anytime they want.
Beautiful. And you just also released a study about PTSD and the role of cannabis with that. Tell us a bit about that.
So that's a study we're very excited about. It was based on interviews with almost 25,000 Canadians, a very large survey conducted by the Government of Canada, looking at all sorts of health conditions. We focused on PTSD. And we found, not surprisingly, that people with PTSD had very high risks of being either having major depression or being suicidal. And that's a very common knowledge around folks living with PTSD. Right. However, what we did is we split the PTSD group up into two. And the people that were not using cannabis had even higher risks of suicidality or depression. But the folks using cannabis, there wasn't any link between having PTSD and having those negative consequences of PTSD. Right. We can't conclude that there's a cause and effect thing happening, but we do know, as you know, that many people living with PTSD are turning or have turned to cannabis to try and deal with some of the symptomology, to try and get a good night's sleep, to try and sleep through the terrible nightmares that are a very common symptom for PTSD. And so we're very encouraged by this, and we're hoping to announce a clinical trial of cannabis.
Are vets
PTSD.
involved?
In the clinical trial, vets will be involved. Most of the individuals who have participated so far are first responders,
right?
Paramedics, police, that sort of thing.
They're basically vets, in my opinion, too.
Yeah.
They
very high levels of trauma. Very high levels of trauma.
For sure.
And unfortunately,
and PTSD runs pretty wild through runs deep through our society. For a lot of people, just come out of childhood with PTSD and they don't even know it.
It's estimated 1 in 10 Canadians have some form of PTSD.
Probably the numbers of people with depression would be similar.
Much higher. Yeah, 25% of some form of anxiety, depression disorder.
Wow.
It's very high in this society, unfortunately. And as you know, it's very costly. The treatments are not very good.
I did one of my shows, my opening rant was about the cost of depression.
Yeah.
And, it really runs, so much through our society and costs us so much in lost wages and all sorts of other things. And cannabis is a pretty good depression lever for many people. And here we are using the criminal law against it. For me, it's just insane. The more I do this show, the angrier I get, I think, as I really have to formulate my thoughts and what it is I'm not happy about.
Right.
And the corruption just runs so deep. This is just a plant. It's a good plant. It's one of the better plants.
Right.
Plants are things that we use for a variety of different reasons. You go into a grocery store and there's a whole bunch of produce there.
Yeah.
And all of that represents some farmer taking his time and space to produce that, to earn money, to feed his family.
Sure.
That's what it's all about. And there is nothing in the produce section of a grocery store that's worth more than $10 a pound.
Sure.
There's nothing anybody gets more than $10 a pound for with respect to medicinal herbs or anything. Well, saffron, but it's a different case because saffron is not some herb that you're just drying and using. Saffron is an extract that you get out of a flower, and it takes an entire football field of saffron flowers to get 1 pound.
Yeah.
And it does sell for $5,000 a pound or up to that much. But cannabis in a whole football field, you could grow
an awful lot.
So much.
An awful lot.
If it wasn't for government corruption, all of those people growing lettuce, tomatoes, carrots, anything else, they would all stop growing that stuff. Right. They would all start growing cannabis if the prices stayed the same, which it wouldn't, of course, because then supply and demand would even things out. And I mean, maybe cannabis because you need to cure it afterwards, and maybe there's a little more involvement in some of those crops that maybe $100 a pound would be reasonable, but is that ever way the hell more than anything else in our environment that people are getting money for?
Well, I mean, it is a bit more difficult, at least from my own experience. I tried to grow my own this season, and Neil, I got to say, if there's any of your listeners out there who can help me with my own it did not go well.
That's all right.
I'm much better at carrots and lettuce than I am
in failure, there are many lessons. And if you if you take what didn't go right and you Google it, you will find that every time you grow is just practice.
Right.
And even the master growers are still just practicing, and they're still just learning. And you'll do better next time.
I think I will.
You will.
I think I will.
And you'll do better one of these times to the point where you're really pleased with what you produced. And there's something pretty special about not just having something that's going to help you the way that cannabis helps you, that you grew yourself,
right,
but the whole journey of growing it is a really nice trip. It's something, and for medical people, if they have the capacity, because a lot of people don't, if they're really sick people, they can't grow.
No.
But those that can, and they're providing their own medicine for themselves, they're also, it's like they're involved in some therapeutic hobby, along the way. But it's even better because it's more connected to what the end result is. It's a powerfully good thing.
Yeah, therapeutic agriculture is a very interesting idea. Not only that what you're growing is helpful, but also the act of growing.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. You got a better term for it than me. Yeah. But that's what I've noticed in my trips across Canada, visiting people growing for themselves, that there's a very big therapeutic aspect to just that itself. You can see it in their faces. They beam about what they tell you, and they look forward to the next day, to looking after their girls,
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
So,
well, I hope I get to the point where I'm good enough to have girls, because this season didn't go all that well.
Well, so, I mean, that's easy if you want, because you could buy just feminized seeds.
I did. Oh, this is how bad it was.
And you
This is
didn't
how
get
badly
girls?
I did. Well, I got girls, but they didn't flower.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, then
that's how bad
there's
it was.
another seed that you can get that's not only feminized, but it's auto-flowering.
That's what I got.
You got auto-flowering
I
and
got
it didn't
auto
flower.
and it didn't flower. No, they're sitting in my garden right now without any flowers. They're just like
Outside?
about this tall. Yeah, outside.
How long have they been growing?
I started them in April. This is how bad I am, Neil. This is why I need
Well,
so much help.
but, just don't be too tough on yourself. I mean, it may be other factors besides that.
I hope so.
Did you buy these seeds commercially from a reputable dealer?
From a licensed producer, indeed.
Oh, from a licensed... They're not reputable. No wonder they didn't produce for you. It is certainly not in their best interests to provide seeds that are going to grow you good medicine.
But Neil, this was regulated by the government of Canada.
Well,
Surely
but it's
up
not
to
in
the
their
highest
best
standard.
interest apparently either to allow people to get
No,
access
I'm
to things.
putting the blame at my own black thumb. That really is the problem. I need to
Well,
do a better
I'm sure
job
the
there,
LP thanks you for that, but I wouldn't trust him. I know that you have a connection. Are you following an agenda of an LP by any chance, being in this position funded by them?
I have no financial relationships with Canopy. I'm an employee of the university, and I have to live up to all the responsibilities of a university.
Do you answer
professor.
to Canopy in any way? Do they call you in and want to know what you're saying and try to influence you?
No.
Well, that's wonderful.
They've only been supportive. Dr. Mark Ware, Hillary Black, who started the Compassion Club, both work for Canopy, and
Cool.
they've been very supportive of our work, but they certainly recognize I'm an independent.
Well, as you are one of our deep cover agents, so are...
It's a serious mission, Neil. I'm not sure.
I
if
understand,
I'm ready
I
for,
do understand, and
for
I
the
appreciate it
responsibilities.
greatly. I hope I haven't exposed anything the evil empire doesn't understand.
Right.
But they have little choice, and any interference would be seen as such and seized upon, because that's what we've become sort of good at, is we can smell a lie coming,
Right.
and we don't let them usually get away with it, and that's why we've gained as much of the gains as we've had.
Sure.
And there's deep cover agents within the LPs as well. Of
course.
I know they've hired a number of friends of mine. I'm not sure they know what they're doing, but it depends on what their agenda is.
Yeah.
There is a coalition of LPs that is forming, and they're having a meeting coming up, 7 p.m. tomorrow, if you're in Vancouver,
Yep.
at 16 East 6th Avenue. The Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers are there to come up with strategies to lobby the government to eliminate the competition. So shame on them for doing that. And that's not going to look good on them. But I think we should go to that meeting and ask some questions if we can. But they're being forced to do these things. And like I say, deep cover goes both ways.
Right.
And we've corrupted their operatives. And I'm not so sure they're corrupting most of ours, although money does seem to have been a carrot that some of our fellow activists have maybe grasped onto, and they've drank some Kool-Aid that is shaping some of their biases. But maybe not. And in the end, I mean, we're working towards something here. I mean, the licensed producers are working towards what they're working towards, and so are, the pot activists and the rights activists. And there needs to be emerging somewhere down the road, hopefully. There's some way to accommodate both sides. I'm a win-win sort of guy.
Yeah.
But I was commenting on that to someone earlier today, that if I'm going to go into something like that, I've got to find a way for them to make money. Like if I'm going to go to this meeting, what can I present to these people who are trying to protect their financial interests by putting down the competition? How can I present it to them that by including competition, by being seen as being inclusive and not prohibitive, they could maybe increase their sales somehow? And I think that's a possibility. I think that's real, true capitalism. Or at least capitalizing on the idea of capitalism, is when you have your actual client's best interests at heart.
Yeah.
And when businesses realize that, and they're willing to direct their customer to the competition down the street because they're actually going to have a product that'll suit their needs better.
Yeah.
And that's just an example of that type of dedication to your client base, that you're willing to not sell them something. In fact, maybe you're wanting to not sell them something if it's not what they need. Happy to sell it to them if that's what's going to solve their needs and that's what you're trying to do.
Right.
But it's those corporations or companies that will sell you something that you don't need because they think they need that sale more than you need to not go home and show your wife something that's not going to work for more than a week or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's just good business. I think good business is having a fair-priced, good product that satisfies the needs of the customer, and that you're willing to turn that customer away, happy to turn that customer away if they don't need to spend money at your facility.
Well, I mean, my point of view on this is simply limited to what we're seeing in the downtown east side.
Yeah, you're not part of what I'm talking about at all. You're not influenced by the LPs.
But I think
you're not there on their behalf.
No. But I think the point about meeting people's needs is important because clearly the people in the downtown east side have a need for cannabis, and clearly there are benefits for a lot of people. Problem is, as we know, the legal market is very expensive. And we have research coming out showing that very few people in the downtown east side can afford to go to government stores.
There's two factors there. There's one, that the legal market is outpricing most of the people that we're helping and that need help. And two is that there's government interference.
Right.
There's a lot of government interference that's blocking the access that these people need. Now, thanks to our project, we've been able to get the city to pass a motion to allow for the dispensing of cannabis to meet the low barrier access requirements, and to address the opioid crisis, which means high dose edibles. Neither of those things are going to be supplied by the government stores.
No.
You are extremely important to us. Thanks to you and what you're doing, we're going to have some ammunition to be able to, and maybe that's not the right word, but it's the word that came to mind.
Sure.
We need to be able to demonstrate that cannabis is safe enough that we don't need to have that level 5 security in our production facilities, that we don't need to worry to any great extent about the source of our cannabis, and that we could test it fairly easily for anything that is of any great concern. And so that we need to be able to operate our medical dispensaries in response to the city's motion, doing our own in-house testing, and not subject to a whole bunch of government regulations and taxes that would boost the price beyond what people can reach. And we need you to be helping us to do that. And so you're playing an extremely important role, I guess, thanks to Canopy. Good on them for doing that. They didn't have to do that, No,
I think that there are more parallel desires here than maybe divergent, right? And certainly in my discussions with Hillary and Mark at Canopy, they're very aware of the toll the overdose crisis is taking in our community. They're very aware of the potential of cannabis to save some of these lives. Are
they aware that we're going to cut into their profit margin by demanding a lower price, because that's what's going to have to happen? Low barrier means that we have to allow just about anybody access to get what we're going to have for them, and we're going to have pricing that'll be on probably a sliding scale for people that can't afford it. It's going to be in a partnership with the CSP, so we're going to have registered members of the CSP that are coming into our dispensary that get to pick whatever they want for a 4-day supply, and then in exchange for more cannabis next time they come in, we'll be filling out a form, a survey of how that worked for them, what the benefits were, what the dosages were, and all that kind of stuff. But on the other side, we're going to have it for sale. And we're going to have it low barrier access, so probably 16 and up, based on what the Canadian Senate said about access to cannabis. And I think we can stand on that and be justified in allowing those people that are also being affected by the opioid overdose crisis access to cannabis in a way that is responsible. So 16 years and old can come and access cannabis. We'll probably have nothing over $8 a gram. And that's going to catch on fast. And we are going to compete with the government stores. And I'm sorry about that to the investors and the shareholders and the company CEOs who want to make big money off of selling what is just a plant for thousands of dollars a pound, which is outrageous and shouldn't happen. So my question was, is Hillary and Canopy aware that by allowing you to do what you're doing, you're going to allow us to do what we're doing, and we're going to come up with stores that are going to compete unfairly with the government stores, and they're going to have to lower their prices, probably reduce their packaging, probably improve on their curing processes and other things like that. That's why I say I'm extremely happy that Canopy did what they did, and they didn't have to do it. And what they're doing is helping us to get proper access to cannabis for people. And I'm sure that they can still make a buck. I'm really sure they can
I think
still
there's
make
room
it
enough
back.
in this world for all.
I really do. I think the cannabis comes in many different forms that help people
Yeah.
that require processing and other things like that.
Sure.
And it should all be priced reasonably, of course.
Yeah.
But there's a good space for people to make good money in providing those products to become. They don't need to be doing what they're doing and having a monopoly basically for only Trudeau's licensed producers to be able to supply the retail market and using tax dollars to run a protection racket with, enforcement teams and more money for police and all the rest of it. Still Prohibition 2.0 on the other side of legalization. It's just the most, it got more insane. It had always been really, really insane for me, this whole prohibition of cannabis, the attempt to prohibit cannabis. Is it a medicine or is it a dangerous drug? Do we need the criminal law to protect people from even having access to possess it or grow it? Or do we need to make it accessible to people because, holy shit, you can't overdose on this stuff and it's going to help you with just about everything. Which is it? Because, it isn't one of those two. It can't be both of those things.
Yeah.
And so, here we are. We're still at war and the war ain't over. But we're doing a good job of at least doing what we can with what we've got. We're up against very sophisticated armies of well-leveraged prohibitionists that have vested interests in keeping the money flowing for what they're doing, it being at the police, being at the courts, or the people running prisons, and many other groups, the people that are selling competing products like alcohol and tobacco and those things, and certainly pharmaceuticals. Cannabis is a threat to all of those industries, and so that within those industries are forces that are doing their level best to try to keep legalization from being reasonable. And there should be no limit on how many plants you could grow for yourself. Why would anybody ever put a limit on that? That sounds ridiculous. The government's, and I was trying to make this point earlier, our public servants should be up on the rooftops yelling, "Hey everybody, we found that this one plant is so not dangerous that we really don't have to worry much about it at all, and it's so beneficial that, hell man, we're going to make sure, because we're public servants, that everybody gets it easily, and those that can't afford it get it free."
You just finished telling me about the terrible hyperemesis episodes you go through. So it can't be completely beneficial. It can't be completely without
I think that nothing is without risk.
As do I.
I think walking and breathing and eating and all of those things. In fact, Anne Livingston, I'm so sorry. She lost her son,
I heard that as well.
To choking on food.
Yeah.
My God, every day is precious and every day is fragile, and we never have any idea if we're going to live beyond it or not. And we should live like that, I think. But no, there are issues. I mean, you can green out on concentrates.
Yeah.
Novice users should not be using more than 10 milligrams of edibles to start with in the beginning, because it can really overwhelm people and be not that it's going to hurt them significantly. Hyperemesis can do significant harm.
That's not a good time. It sounds like.
Yeah, it definitely can do significant harm. I was horrified to find out that it was likely due to my cannabis use, but that's what it turned out, that something in there is that, because I'd had it going on for years and didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
I was in hospital numerous times being checked out for all kinds of things, gallbladder, ulcers, you name it. And they could never come up with what was going on. I just got better after a number of days. If they put me on an IV, it sped things up a little bit, and I could get out of there. But then it was one of my fellow activist friends sent me a PubMed article several years ago where there was a few doctors in California that had been getting together talking about some of the patients they had in common, and realizing that there was something different going on here. Mostly what was the difference was the hot water.
Right.
And they were all chronic cannabis users.
Yeah.
So it's very rare amongst chronic cannabis users, but that's the population where it exists. And then it's hot baths will relieve the desire to vomit. It's a cyclical vomiting. That's hyperemesis. Emesis, as you know, means vomiting. And it's probably dangerous, to be throwing up like that at any time is dangerous. And for me, I get migraines at the end of it too. I won't have eaten for 7 to 10 days. Yeah. And I'll have a moment where it breaks. Now this, like I said, I haven't had these types of episodes for the last few years. It's been getting much, much less. But for the body, or the bulk of 20 years, I would have these 7 to 10 day episodes. Yeah. And on that 7th or 10th day, I would just all of a sudden be hungry. I would all of a sudden be like, I need some chicken noodle soup, and I want a pear, and I want some tomato juice, and I just all of a sudden get ravishingly hungry.
It would come back.
It would come back. Yeah, I would relapse because I would eat too much usually.
Right.
Anything salty was so salty. Anything sweet was so sweet, and but I learned I had to be very careful about how I weaned myself back into eating because I was ravishing. Everything looked so good, and it was a process. But yeah, that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And in response to your question, I think that some things require regulation.
Sure.
Most things seem to require some regulation because most things can be used improperly.
Yeah.
That regulations are there to protect the purchaser of something in a retail situation from the potential that this could cause. That it is in a direct conflict with human rights whenever you're doing that, putting restrictions on things. That the regulations need to be in a balance with human rights. They need to be reasonable and representative of what the actual harm is. And in almost all cases, all that is required, the only regulation that is required is a simple warning, is education. Mm-hmm. That people are not trying to harm themselves. They're usually just trying to have a good time, to feel better, that sort of thing. Yep. And that if there's a potential for using something improperly that would cause you not to have a good time, that if that's on the label or properly communicated in some way, then that's all that should happen on a commodity. Some things have a very risky overdose opportunity. Some things you can hurt yourself on pretty easily if you're not careful. Those things require more restrictions, more regulations, age restrictions, but they need to be the least intrusive possible on the free human being who's having it imposed on their ability to access something. And if it becomes, as soon as regulations become to the point where it's easier to access through an underground supply, then those regulations are no longer doing their job. In fact, they become counterproductive. They need to be scaled back because you can't have people using dangerous stuff that's unregulated and therefore much more dangerous, sold by irresponsible
And this
people.
is probably the lesson of the vaping crisis that we're seeing right now in the U.S.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Be aware. And if the government has some role in playing in helping people become aware, and the manufacturers or the retailers have some responsibility in making people aware, but least intrusive possible, tell people the truth about things. And if people are irresponsible after that, well, I mean, we sell gasoline to 10-year-olds. So,
10-year-olds?
12 anyway.
12? Is that
you can drive a car at 16. Well. Join the army at 17.
Can. That's true.
There's a lot of these dangerous things that human beings engage in, and like we said, just about everything could be, has some danger to it.
Sure.
The role of government is the issue. And that's my issue. That's what this show is all about.
Yep.
Is that we are free people and we deserve that. Our forefathers fought for that, and we have that as a natural right. And that these public servants that are imposing these penalties for non-consensual or for victimless consensual crimes amongst adults are way out of line. They are doing great. It's blasphemy to our soldiers, our friends, our family, all the people that have fought for the freedoms that we have. It is a real slap in the face to those people that our public servants have allowed themselves to be coerced and co-opted by these I call them corporate forces. They're financially elite forces, whatever they are. But people that have no business affecting government policy are doing so in a way to protect their interests and their financial well-being at the great expense of the people that our public servants are being paid by the public to protect. And it's become so corrupt, and it runs so deep, and it runs to the top, and it's so obvious in what they're doing with cannabis. Like I say, they should be up on the rooftop screaming, "We're going to help everybody get access to this. This is great, folks. We've secured this amazing plant from nature that is going to be so great for everybody." Yeah. And instead, they're continuing the reefer madness lies, playing up every aspect of it if they can, of where there might be some danger to it. I mean, the hyperemesis thing is becoming a thing because there's been articles written about it because, here's something else that they can say that it's harmful. Right. Whereas in reality, I know almost nobody. I know actually a couple people that suffer the same thing. Right. And I know thousands of people that are chronic cannabis users, and they can't even believe it. When they get told about it, they go, no, never heard of that. It's very, very rare. Yeah. It's probably unflushed cannabis. It's probably fertilizers and pesticides or something like that. Yeah. When I look at where I was getting my cannabis from for all of this time, there's a good possibility that, it wasn't as cared for as it is by, your local dealer's grower who, loves what they're doing. So what's in the future for you now? I mean, there's more studies to come. Did you say you released one today?
We did. We released one today looking at the relationship between using illicit opioids and using cannabis. And, as you know, in the downtown east side, lots of people are living with chronic pain.
So we're going to be able to use that one in defense of what we're doing.
I would imagine there might be some usefulness there.
Very good. Very good.
So I'll share that with you.
We may need to present that at some point in the not too distant future, opening a dispensary and all.
Happy to share with that study with you.
We might have it printed out and put on the wall.
Well, it's not the concluding chapter. It's just another sort of chapter in the book that we're.
There will be a concluding chapter at some point.
Well, I don't know if science ever has a concluding chapter, but
when we spoke with you last at Pot TV, it was on Jeremiah's show, and you alluded to something happening in November. Is that what is today's?
So
that's the one today.
Event, yeah.
Oh, very good.
And then of course we have the event on Monday, which will hopefully get a chance for folks like you and folks.
So you can watch that online at
go to bccsu.ca and people will be able to find the details there. But it'll be a public web stream up on Monday morning,
and that'll be very, very interesting. And I imagine there'll be a lot of academics and a lot of political leaders that'll be interested in that as well. I imagine so. I would hope.
We're going to have some researchers. We're having an eminent researcher from Los Angeles, Dr. Ricky Bluthenthal, who's doing a lot of the same work that we're doing up here and seeing a lot of the same stuff that down in California there are people.
And the whole symposium is on cannabis as a harm reduction tool.
That's right. That's right.
And it starts at 8:30 in the morning.
It does.
And it runs until
about 1 o'clock.
Oh, so not very long at all.
It's a quick event.
It's a quick event.
It's a quick event.
I get to watch the whole thing. I was going to stay anyway, probably.
Great.
And
4 panels, so we have your panel.
But there's not a lot of availability for people to actually go there.
I think physically we're pretty close to the limit, but the web stream is as many people as they like.
Yeah, I recommend you watch that. That's going to be very, very interesting. This is where the fight is for access to medical cannabis. It's really unfortunate. It is really unfortunate that there has to be an overdose crisis with people dying for us to be able to have the ability to fight back and demand access to medical cannabis for that reason. Yeah. And thankfully with cannabis, it's not just that reason, it's all those other underlying drivers of the addiction and the opioid use that cannabis is effective in helping with. So it really is, it's a platform that we have, but I don't think that just the sick and suffering Canadians that aren't involved in overdose opioid deaths would have been enough to demand that we have medical cannabis here. The city only passed their motion allowing for for the low barrier access and to address the opioid crisis because of our project and Sarah's project with the OPS, with High Hopes Foundation, with the CSP. Yep. That's the only reason we got that. Had we not been doing that, I don't think the 420 farmers market was enough to or the lobby on the side of sick and suffering Canadians. I don't know why, but they don't have as loud a voice as what they should have. These are the people that really do deserve our compassion, and as a society, we need to protect them. And they're the ones that are being left behind in this legalization. And the fight that we have to bring that back and to counter that is because of the overdose crisis, and because of what you're doing with your professorship in giving us the ammunition that we need to be able to speak to the authorities and say, this works, this is real, here's the act. Because they don't care about my 300 people that line up twice a week with big smiles on their face, thanking us in tears for what we're doing and telling us how it's. They don't care about that. They've never come to see that. You came to see it and see what we're doing. Yeah. I've never had a counselor there. I've never had a policeman stand there and watch us. I've never had anybody from Coastal Health come and see what we're doing. And why not? And why not? Because these people are saying that it doesn't work and saying that cannabis shouldn't be available the way that it should be. Why aren't they coming and actually seeing what's going on? I don't understand that. I'm not asking you that as a question to answer.
I don't know the answer.
I know you don't know the answer.
What I do know,
it's corruption. I'll tell you that.
Well,
it's corruption.
What I do know, I think, is that the actions that you're taking, the actions that Sarah taking, are pushing forward what's possible.
It is,
right?
And you're allowing us to do that.
And it's the same with the safe injection site, right? The safe injection
supervised
site, supervised
injection site. That's very important. Just a side note on that, I have to clarify.
Please do, sure.
There is no such thing as a safe injection, even when doctors do it in a hospital. It's never really safe. It's safer, and it's pretty safe, but it's not safe. And it's so not safe that when it's done on the street with people using illegal drugs behind dumpsters and things like that, that the only way to save those people properly is to have supervised injections, and supervised specifically because it's not safe. So watch out for calling them safe injection sites. They're really supervised because they're not safe. And it's important not to send that message that they're safe, because if there's people that are struggling with pain of any sort and they're considering, going to the streets and starting to inject, that way, they need to know too that even though there's a supervised site, it's not safe. And people do overdose at those sites, but they don't die because it's supervised and they're able to be brought back. But being brought back after overdosing takes a serious impact on your health and your future health, and it's not a great idea at all. So anyway, I just had to say that.
That's an excellent.
Every chance I get, I make
good,
that point.
Explanation.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
But look, I think that one of the lessons of the supervised injection site was that people like Anne Livingston opened them up and showed people, look, the sky doesn't fall when you provide people a safe.
You have to demonstrate it.
You have to demonstrate it. And what you're doing and what Sarah's doing is
and what you're doing is demonstrating.
I'm not giving anyone cannabis.
But you're demonstrating that it works by gathering the information and doing the studies on it. You are absolutely demonstrating that it can be effective for people. We don't have. That's what my point is. We don't have the credibility without you to make those points with people. But because of people like yourself and other people, there's other studies that are valuable to us as well. But without those, we would not be able to sway the opinions of these people.
Well, and that's what's going to be great about Monday, because we're going to bring a lot of these folks together, right?
Perfect.
Folks on the front line.
And we're going to share.
We're going to share. People with living experience are going to talk about what cannabis means to them in the context of the overdose crisis, and hopefully we're going to push things forward so that we make your work easier, so that we make the options more for people living with risk of overdose. So hopefully it's going to be a good event, and of course I invite everyone to tune in on the webcast. I
hope everybody tunes into that, and
I'm very
we'll share it to the ones that don't.
I'm very grateful for your participation. It wouldn't be the same without you.
And I'm very grateful that you came on the show today,
and
for all the work that you're doing. As I said, we couldn't do what we're doing without you. You are so valuable to the movement for freedom and proper access to people.
It's a great
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And I hope we have you on the show again, sometime not too far down the road.
Whenever you like.
Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Neil.
All right.
How does the our marijuana edibles help you?
Hey, well, actually, weed slows down your brain when you have chronic pain. Your brain goes too fast, so you can't focus.
Oh, and so that it slows it down, so your pain is less.
Yeah, so you're still in pain, but you can handle it. Like, you can laugh about it.
What do you have pain from?
I have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. Cerebellar ataxia, a lot of war wounds, fibromyalgia. Yeah, I have a lot of things wrong with me, so they overlap, or that's why I don't like taking meds. I haven't done meds in like 30 years.
It's a marijuana cream.
Yes, and this really works because when I got arthritis in my wrists and my knees, and it helps when I go to sleep. And it does work.
Do you eat any of the edibles?
I eat gummy bears and whatever they have. Any of the edibles I can eat, and that makes me go to sleep.
Okay, so you don't need any prescription drugs then?
No.
Oh, that's so good.
I hate prescription.
Do you mind if I ask you how old you are?
Go ahead.
How old are you?
I'm 59, I'll be 60, and I don't have a gray hair.
Oh.
Yeah, the CSP has been helping people get access for quite a while here, and as I said during the interview, I can't thank Dr. Milloy enough for what he's doing and in the way that he's running his professorship at UBC in confirming what we all know that are close to it, that cannabis absolutely works for people to help them with their opioid addictions and opioid withdrawals and all of that other stuff. The CSP, been running for 2 years and 9 months now. We're the Cannabis Substitution Project. We're every day, or twice a week rather, at Van Du at 380 East Hastings, Thursdays and Sundays at noon. If you have any donations that you would like to bring for us to give people, we give out these high-dose edibles. There's the cream that that woman was talking about. We also had wrecked crispy squares, and we have really good wholesome cookies for people. Joe Pepper makes brownies every time that we're there. If you have something that you would like to contribute to our project, we'd be happy to have that, and we'd be happy to pass it along and help people that are struggling with addictions. And as I alluded to earlier, many of these people are people that come from all walks of life, and they're in many cases people that were abused as children and trying to struggle through their life with that hanging over their heads and other things like that. So they really do deserve our compassion and our help. And so if you can help, we will help you help. And that's what we do. Excuse me. So that's our CSP update. We are still actively involved with finding a storefront, and there are some developments going on with that. I'll keep you updated as we go. But, and I should say also that we had off the top Dylan and his protest and his outreach post at the art gallery today and every day and all day every day until the police decide to shut him down, and then he has plans for how he's going to use that to help further access for people. And you can go down there and help support him. And he's really a CSP outpost for us, that he's providing access to people that aren't on the downtown east side, and it's very important to support what he's doing as well. And I support anybody else that wants to start their own little version of the CSP and helping people, and it's going on all over the place. I have people contacting me from many places across Canada and other places as well that are doing their own thing and helping people get access to cannabis, especially in the form of edibles, and that's just great. I mean, I support all those initiatives, and I think we need more of that, and maybe that's how we can get dispensaries in all of these other little towns across Canada, and other municipalities can then follow Vancouver's lead and pass motions to license places that are dealing with high dose edibles and low barrier access to cannabis to help people that are struggling with addictions or medical issues. So in coming events, there's not a lot going on in the cannabis world. There's a bunch of LP stuff that I'm not going to tell you about, and you should probably boycott all of that stuff. There is the one thing that's going on tomorrow that we can maybe go down and nicely have a chat with this coalition of cannabis retailers, Canadian cannabis retailers, that are coming up with strategies to how to get rid of cannabis dispensaries and the competition. And they talk the government into spending more money on paying more policemen to bust down people's doors and destroy plants and keep them from getting access to cannabis because they want to be the only ones selling people cannabis. So shame on them. And we'll go and nicely talk to them if we can. That's at 16. Is that what that? Let's see where that is. Make sure I get it right. Yeah, that's the one that's tomorrow. I just don't see where there it is. 16 East 6th Avenue at 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. Tomorrow in Vancouver. The Coalition of Canadian Cannabis Retailers having a strategy session on how to wipe out the competition. So, that's going on. And the Prairie Harvest Cup was the last major event that happened, and we should have more of that going on, I think. There needs to be more cups because I don't really have anything to announce at this point in the show. So we're going to show you one more quick segment from the Prairie Cup and how much fun people were having there.
Well, you should take it serious. This is the Cannabis Olympics.
Well, that's right.
I mean, this don't happen anywhere else in the world except the Prairie Cup.
Man, you know what's funny? Everybody recording is going to be all over the internet. There's other countries that people still go to jail for weed, and they're like, man, what are they doing? We're at a convention weighing it in front of everyone. Canada! They're like, yes, this is fun to weigh out drugs. You know what I mean? Makes me laugh, man. We're so ahead of the time.
It's like legalization.
This is legalization. Where we are right now. What we see out there, so many mums and pops being shut out, so many community shops that were opened up to help medical patients with creams, oils, edibles, not just smokables, it wasn't just about cashing in, it was about compassion.
Everybody, I'll yell it out. Okay, everybody's hands are in position. Go!
He's got the weed in the paper.
Sean also has the weed in the paper. He's stumbling a little bit. He's got the lip down. He's trying to fold it over. Everybody's done?
Oh, my
Next! Go!
And they're off. Once That was nuts.
Donna was 7.18. What's the time on that?
11 seconds, man.
11:02 for Truman. Let's see it.
Got a nice joint.
That is a nice joint.
With 21 seconds.
21.
We're already dead, bud.
We are now going to take a few minute break to set up for the next competition, which is the fattest joint roll. The fattest joint roll. So we're just going to bust up some more weed and meet back here in 5 minutes.
When you think of Saskatoon activism, you think of Jeff. He's done a lot for this community, and not just in the prairies. Standing up for the community in the prairies resonates around the whole country and inspires people in the whole country. If Jeff can do it in Saskatoon, I can do it too, and that's amazing. So keep inspiring people and keep being inspired by people like Jeff so we can keep pushing these boundaries and make these laws fair for everyone. Thanks, guys.
Harley Marley, everybody. Beautiful, thank you so much. Somebody take me on. Somebody take me on.
Yep, that's how we roll, and that's how we fight the war. We have fun. We get together. We have competitions that make us laugh, and there's no doubt about it. This is a war that's waged against our communities, those cannabis-using people, and it's been going on for a long time, and they're still ramping it up, if anything. So that's the way we fight it. I was very happy to be able to talk a little bit about that today. It gets it off my chest a little bit. I want to thank my guests today, 8 out of 10 Glen from CannaMatch.ca, helped us with the 420 session, and Jerry Martin is so kind to come on and visit us for the Martin Medical Moment, and Dr. M.J. Milloy, the cannabis professor. Very privileged to be able to have him on the show and to get his opinion on things. Without him, our movement would be having a little more trouble than it is. He's a real asset to those of us that know that cannabis is medicine, and cannabis is the answer to a lot of people's issues, and it can certainly be part of the solution for keeping people from dying of opioid and street drug deaths because of the lacing of fentanyl and the poison supply. I want to thank Cannabis Culture for giving me the opportunity to have this space and communicate my thoughts to you. I want to thank those other co-hosts that have shows on Cannabis Culture. We have Carly Marley on Mondays with the 420 Lifestyle Show, all things fun about cannabis, and a lot of good times and good information on Carly's show. There's Under the Influence, the Marijuana Man on Wednesdays, putting things in his unique perspective and exposing all the different aspects of what's not right and wrong in our world. We've got Cannabis News Live on Fridays with Jeremiah Vandermeer, his co-hosts and his variety of guests that really bring everybody right up to speed with what's going on in the cannabis world. There's Boss Lissa on Saturdays with her show High Noon, just recently passed the 100 mark for shows on her, and that's a lot of fun. What's this about? They smoked over 100 joints on that show. There's the physical proof right there. Man, oh man. And nobody died, of course. Didn't need no police, didn't need to arrest anybody. There was nothing dangerous going on. And thank all of you for watching, and I'll be back next Tuesday with another episode of THC, Truth, Hope, and Change. And have as much fun as you can changing the world.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
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 Hi. It's high noon here in the studio.
Look at it. Look at the bud. Right there.
And it was just like so many people, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I was like, I have to cross it.
Acronyms, baby.
some reason, I always get
I love
so they
how
paid
they're
$8
like,
for half a pencil.
I love.
just put it out there.
Chin up. Hi there, welcome to the 420 Lifestyle Show. I'm Carly Marley. She's taking a dab. Thanks.
We can play the Sick Moose video.
Oh yes, Sick and Moose video. Let's play the Sick and Moose video.